by saying that I'm certainly no professional historian. I am a social anthropologist, not sure about some of the other AI-generated details there in my biography, but I am a social anthropologist, definitely not a professional historian. But I have been exploring these scrolls and their stories. So in terms of their historical background, this is what I can share with you. So in 1930, there was pretty good data, pretty good census data to show that there were well over 100,000 Jews in, again, today's Czech Republic, then Bohemia and Moravia, and about 350 synagogues. So a pretty healthy Jewish life and Jewish population in that space. By 1943, of course, the situation was quite different. About 26,000 of those original 117,000 Jews that were there in the 30s had left. And it seems pretty accurate in terms of the count and the figuring that has been done to say that 82,309 of the Jews living in the area were deported, 71,000 to various camps, 71,000 of them were murdered, and about 7,000 Jews were also murdered by the Nazis, but prior to being deported, sort of murdered in the course of their rampage across Bohemia and Moravia. So there was a decent Jewish population in this area, and they, of course, had Torah scrolls. And finally, I should just note that today, the population of the Czech Republic is a bit over 10 million and has now only 4,000 Jews. So the Torah scrolls that would have been part and parcel of these Jewish communities. In 1906, and still today, there's the Jewish Museum in Prague was established. Now, when the Nazis came into the area, they turned the Jewish Museum into a storehouse, literally a warehouse for Jewish items that were taken from synagogues and from Jewish homes. Now, this is a fascinating episode in history because the Nazis both stole Jewish items that they considered to be of value, especially anything that was made with precious metals, adorned in any way, anything they thought that basically could be sold. But also, it seems that a number of Jewish communities throughout those areas of Bohemia and Moravia thought that it might be possible that some of their most precious possessions could be saved from Nazi destruction if they sent their possessions into this museum turned warehouse of their own accord. So it was a bit of a, the documents, the historical documents show us that there was a bit of strategizing amongst the Jews in those Jewish communities, thinking, how can we try to save these precious, precious items? And they ranged, these precious items ranged from things like tablecloths to Torah scrolls, as well as, of course, the yad that might be used while reading a Torah scroll, which would have been made of silver or something else quite beautiful. How can we save it? As well as the fact that Nazis looted and stole as they moved through the area. So what happened was there was this massive influx of Jewish objects into the museum. And in fact, there was so much of it, so many objects that the museum wasn't in fact large enough. The Nazi commanders there sort of took control of a number of other buildings in the area so they could just stuff them full of all of these Jewish possessions. The Nazis also, as I think probably we all know, were very good at record keeping and made the Jews who had worked in the museum prior to the war do all of the cataloging of all of these items. And a lot of it was, quite meticulously done. And there was a lot of, I think my reading of this, again, not as a professional historian, but my reading of this episode of history is that there seems to have been a lot of confusion. You can find in earlier historical accounts of this particular Nazi episode ideas that maybe people thought maybe the Nazis are trying to save all this stuff, not to sell it, but to create a museum of an extinct race. This is a big sort of theory going around perhaps amongst the Jews themselves and at the time, and also picked up to some extent by various historians. It's pretty much discredited as a realistic possibility. But, you know, there was a lot that was happening, and, you know, it must have been a beyond terrifying time. So it's hard to know exactly what the plan was to do with all of this stuff, especially the stuff that had no monetary value, but there it was. Okay, so after the war, there was the communist coup in what is now the Czech Republic, and the Czech government took control of the Jewish Museum and all of these associated spaces that were stuffed full of all of these Jewish objects. Now, in particular, they had Torah scrolls. Torah scrolls, again, it seems were both stolen and sent by the stolen from and sent by the Jewish communities themselves. So there's the Czech government with almost 2,000 Torah scrolls amongst all these other objects, okay? And they didn't know what to do with them. I don't know what prompted them to keep them, but they did keep them and put them in what has been described as a damp warehouse, which was once a synagogue built in the 16th century. So these scrolls and their complicated, you know, stories of being stolen, being sent away, you know, somehow being maintained for some purpose that we're not really entirely sure of, get shoved into this old, damp synagogue by the government. And here's a photo from the Memorial Scrolls Trust, which we'll talk about in just a moment, of what sort of this storage, usually using the term loosely, system looked like in the synagogue where they were kept. They were literally, these scrolls were just thrown in there. Obviously, you can see there are pieces of the scrolls. They're not all, you know, rolled. Yeah, and they were floor to ceiling. So as the time passed, Eric Esterich, who was a British Jewish art dealer who worked with the government, the Czech government, to buy and sell Eastern European art. He visited Prague, and the government officials there, who are now in possession of all of these Jewish objects, but particularly the scrolls, said, hey, you know, Eric, could you take a look in this synagogue? It's stuffed full of all these things. We don't know what to do with it. Are they worth anything? That was really the bottom line. So Eric Esterich goes and takes a look inside the synagogue, which is this warehouse now for these Torah scrolls, and is stunned. He's stunned by what he sees. And he says, hang on, let me go back to London, England, and get someone who knows more about scrolls. Eric Esterich, there's no evidence to suggest he was a particularly religious man. He had no idea what to do, what to look for. He was just befuddled. And he went back to England, and he actually brought back with him a man named Dr. Abramsky. I'm going to skip ahead for just one moment, sorry. And he brought with him Dr. Abramsky, who was quite a well-known scholar of Jewish life, Jewish history, and Jewish texts. And he took Dr. Abramsky to the storehouse. And this is a description that I've taken of what Dr. Abramsky saw from a very interesting book written about the history of the Holocaust Torahs from the Memorial Scrolls Trust. And so as you can see here, here's what the author wrote. And here's the book title. In case you would like to get one of your own, I can help if that's difficult. The first sight that met Dr. Abramsky's eyes on walking into the Mishle synagogue was heartrending. On wooden shelves from floor to ceiling were hundreds upon hundreds of Sifrei Torah, untouched for 20 years, still in their wrappings as the Jewish workers had tenderly laid them. He was not ashamed to weep. He could see at once that his task was formidable. Some of the Torahs were burned when the synagogues which they were taken from were torched. Some were blood-stained. 2 were held together with pieces of a woman's corset. The human misery embodied in that tragic collection was a palpable reminder of what had befallen the Jewish race. A little bit of dated language there. We obviously don't usually refer to Jews as a racialized group anymore, but this is the author's wording. So Abramsky says, we want them all. We want them all. We don't know what they're worth, if anything, but we, Jews in London, England, we want them all. So Abramsky and Estrick go back to London, England, and Estrick approaches a well-known Jewish philanthropist named Ralph Yablon. And yeah, they tell the story to Yablon, who says, I'll pay. No problem. I'm paying for them. He gives the Czech government, 30,000 US dollars. And the Czech government put the scrolls in railway cars and shipped them to London, England. So, interesting side note, which we won't maybe go in too deeply, but I will just mention there were talks between the Israeli government and the Czech government as well about buying the scrolls. And those talks basically fell apart for many reasons, but one of them was the Israelis who were trying to get the scrolls to go to Israel, they had concerns about whether or not all the scrolls should sort of be kept in use and where they would be dispersed in Israel. But they also said, you know what, you Czechs, not yours to sell. So we're not going to give you but a pittance for your trouble. Thank you very much. And the Czech government said, you know, we're going to hold out for a better deal. So anyway, very interesting sideline there. But in the end, the scrolls go to London, England, thanks to Yablon. So they go to the Memorial Scrolls Trust. What is that? They actually went first to Westminster Synagogue. The synagogue created a committee to try to handle this massive influx of Torah scrolls. And they built shelving that you can see in the photo here. They worked to catalog them based on any records that they could find. And they create a nonprofit called the Memorial Scrolls Trust. So this, the early accounts of what it must have been like to be receiving these scrolls that came, you know, on trains, the symbolism, it must have just been really something, but it was a bit of a mad scramble. There was, of course, not very much money to work with, but they did what they could. So as the Scrolls Trust, and here they are also stored in the trusts now, in the trusts, they're specially built cabinets and so on, and you can see they're numbered, they're covered, they're rolled properly. The Scrolls Trust people say, you know, the best thing we can do with these scrolls is send them to new Jewish homes around the world. But we won't sell them because they truly are not ours to sell. We will give them on permanent loan to Jewish communities that will commit to taking care of them and housing them and loving them. So the Memorial Scrolls Trust has sent, I think the total they're up to now is about 1,300 of the Torah scrolls to all of these places, all over the world, you can see, including 26 to Canada, which is my focus, but quite a large number to the United States. The vast majority have gone to the United States. Just because I know that you have one of these Holocaust Torah scrolls, both of my nieces have have held them. I'm not sure if they read from them or not, but have held them during their bat mitzvah ceremonies just recently. The CRC's Holocaust Torah scroll came from a synagogue. Again, it's not my area of expertise. Holosov in the Czech Republic, and that synagogue was, and this is a picture, I think I've tried to find of it. It was built in 1560, quite an old synagogue. And there's no Jewish community there anymore, which is, of course, the case in the vast majority of these synagogues that are still standing. But it does house an exhibition of the Jewish community of Moravia at the time. So my own research is very much focused on the present and the future of these scrolls. So I leave it to the historians to probe all of the historical intricacies and the debates around, what the Nazi intention was and the Czech government's, desperate need for US dollars and their greed and the Israeli connection. I leave it to the historians to really go deeply into those issues. But I'm really interested in, where are the scrolls now and what do they mean? How do people today think about their scrolls? Who went out of their way to acquire them? Why did they do it? Where are they kept? Are all the scrolls that are in Canada, at least, because we have so many fewer than the U.S., it's a bit easier to get a grip on it. Are they kept in arks? Not all of them are strictly kosher for reading from. Are they kept in cabinets? How are they used? When are they used? Are they used at certain holidays? Or for certain special occasions, like my niece's bat mitzvahs? And really, what do they mean to the communities that host and take care of them? And it's a 4-year project, so I am very much at the beginning stages, but I do think that there's some interesting things already that I can maybe just hazard a few guesses about for you tonight. One is that in terms of their meaning, at least, it's actually quite remarkable how differently thought about they are in each setting. And I've only worked so far with 6 settings of the 26 in Canada, but they're amazingly diverse. One community might keep their scroll. Actually, I think I have a picture. This is at a Reform synagogue in Toronto, and the Holocaust Torah is the one on the right, the white covered one. And this was a really fascinating interview with the woman who basically, she calls herself a cantorial soloist, but she takes care of the scrolls. And she said they were so excited to get this scroll. They got it just a few years ago. And it was actually awaiting a home, not in Westminster at the Memorial Scrolls Trust, but it was actually in New York, waiting for a permanent home to be found. And she said they ordered it, a cover to be made to match the other 2 scrolls that you can see here. And they ordered for it the same sort of jewelry, the dressing that you can see there, the ornaments. And then she said it arrived. And this was, it's the cover with which it arrived. And she said, I'll never change it. It's perfect as it is. And it might be hard to see from the photo there, but sort of down here you can see the handles. She said the handles are old and worn and chipped, and it's perfect. She said it is not to be dressed just like the others. It's not to wear the same handles, the same ornaments, nothing. It must stay perfect as it is, and we will care for it until the end of our days as it is. And she was very, very committed and very poetic about the fact that this scroll was not a scroll just like the others. It was not to be dressed the same way, that it had to just remain as close as it could be to its origin story and what it might have looked like in its hometown. in a different setting, in a different city. This is, here you see here another Torah scroll from the Memorial Scrolls Trust, and it's in a case, a glass case, and it's not read from. It's rolled occasionally to keep it in good shape. But fascinatingly, and perhaps what we sometimes might not want to always think about, when I contacted this synagogue and the rabbi at this synagogue to ask him if we could have an interview about his Holocaust Torah, he was very gracious. He agreed, of course. And I sent him all the information in advance, I'm required to do. And then we got on and he said, which Torah? I don't know where that Torah is. And I tried not to look judgmental. It's really not my job. Might have shown, I don't know. But it's a big synagogue. They have 20 Torah scrolls. And he said, let me get back to you. And he did, which was lovely. And it turns out this particular synagogue has a kind of a hallway that is filled with Holocaust. It's like a Holocaust memorial hallway, they call it, and it has a number of displays. And that's where the scroll is kept, in a case in this hallway. And it's, I think that actually our interview may have prompted him to wonder if maybe it is best served sitting there. I'm not sure. But, he found it again, and now he knows where it is. And what they now do with it is hard to know. But it does speak to the fact that not every Holocaust Torah has become a kind of focal point or a highly elaborated object, but sometimes has been carefully and respectfully put somewhere and left. That might be the end of my photos. But I will tell you there are other examples as well. One that I love is also of a Holocaust Torah that is on display in a case, not used regularly, but it's been placed very purposefully and very carefully at the entrance to the Jewish library. It's a giant Jewish community center in Ottawa, and they have, it's the shul with a pool concept. So they have the sanctuary, they have all the athletics, they have, and they have a massive library. And the librarian there said it had been, their scroll had been encased in plexiglass and sort of on a tabletop. And when she became the head librarian, she said, you know what? I want this Holocaust Torah put into a new, beautiful display case at the front entrance of the library. And I want it there because people will stop and they'll look at it. And it will be an invitation to come in, to see the library, to keep reading about Jewish life and Jewish history and Jewish anything. And so for her, it was very powerful and very purposefully put into a glass display case in order to facilitate Jewish learning. Another example, which is quite lovely, is there's only one Holocaust Torah scroll in Canada that is at a Jewish day school. And it's a Reformed Jewish day school in Toronto. And they have built their Holocaust Torah a special little ark that is on wheels, and they roll it around to wherever it needs to go to talk to the kids about it. They use it for Rosh Chodesh services, and it is very much sort of an actively used, touched, and embraced object in that particular community. So, the diversity is tremendous. I don't have a single theme emerging yet, but I will say that it's fascinating, and that I think the fact that there is no single sort of interpretation that is a good thing and reflects the diversity of Jewish communities as they exist even just in Canada, but obviously I'm sure that the diversity would only increase the more exploration one were to do of the Holocaust stories that have been sent around the world. I think I'll stop there, and I can stop sharing and give you back the screen, Rabbi. Okay.
Thank you. That was so fascinating.
Pleasure.
So we'd love to open this up for some questions if you're up for it. So please, if you have questions, either unmute yourself or use the raise hand feature or type them into the chat. I know one of the takeaways I can't stop thinking about is I can't tell you how many times I have told the story about how these were supposed to end up in a Nazi museum.
Oh,
Over and over again. And I've heard the story. I've told the story. I've multiple congregations. We've repeated this story, including our Peoria congregation, which also had a Holocaust Torah. Um,
honestly, again, I'm not the professional historian. And as you probably know, these theories go in and out of favor. Right now, I think a lot of historians are leaning away from that, but they don't really have a good answer for why they were kept, why the Torah scrolls were kept. So, it's certainly an idea that has been out there for a long time.
so I guess my question while we're waiting for other folks, knowing that the Canadian Jewish context is different from the American one, and I know that one of the important distinctions is just there's so many more Holocaust survivors in Canada as a percentage of the population of Jews. Are the politics of Holocaust Torahs different in Canada than in the United States? Is the meaning different? Do you see things across the border that just reflect differently? Does that make sense?
Well, I think you're right to note that there are differences between the Canadian and American Jewish sort of landscape. Canada's obviously much smaller. It is by and large a much younger, in the sense of arrived in Canada more recently, Jewish population than in the US. And sort of accompanying those different histories, there are far fewer Reform synagogues in Canada. So, there are sort of sometimes Canadians really get bent out of shape when you put it this way, but sort of some people might say you can understand the Canadian Jewish community by it's a generation sort of behind where the American Jewish community is at, but Canadians don't like when you call them behind. But in some sense, it's true that there's still a bit more of a Orthodox conservative presence and far fewer Reform. And so the politics surrounding Holocaust Torah scrolls actually, I think, relates to a question I just saw here in the chat, which is the quality of the parchment compromised. Can the scrolls be used during services? And that is actually a very political question in the sense that how an Orthodox congregation answers that, relating to the bottom question, what does it mean for a Torah to not be kosher? How an Orthodox sort of perspective on a Torah's usability means that it's perfect. It's still in perfect condition. There are no missing letters. The parchment isn't ripped. It's, in perfect condition for being read from. And that means no errors, no fading, no problems with the actual written story. A Reform synagogue, a Reform temple, would be much more likely to say, we can still use a scroll, even if it has evidence of its age and its history. And in fact, one synagogue that I did interview, a temple I did interview, is one of the largest Reform temples in all of Canada, and they have one of these scrolls, and they said, it's kosher enough for us, but it might not be for an Orthodox interpretation of suitability to be used. So I guess with respect to politics, it gets political in terms of, is it able to be used for a service, not for a service? If you don't use it for a service, can you dance with it on Simchas Torah, but otherwise still keep it in the ark? These are actually very political questions for religious communities to try to answer for themselves, and they certainly don't all have the same answers depending on where they are at on that Jewish spectrum. So yeah, I think I can say there are some politics with respect to these kinds of issues around Torah scrolls. Why aren't all the Torah scrolls rehomed yet? I think that a couple issues. One is simply that some of them just cannot be moved ever. They're too fragile. They're just about to fall apart, and so they will just stay at Westminster Synagogue. And the other is, I think simply that they need what the gentleman who works there, who's ferociously protective of the scrolls, proper homes to go to. So he wants to know that they're going to be taken care of. They ask for a contribution in order to obtain a scroll, not to buy it, but to support all the work that is required to maintain the building and to keep the scrolls that are still there safe. But they are still sending them out. Air Canada went through a brief period of fame in the late 80s for allowing one of the scrolls to fly for free in a seat, which was very touching to the Jewish community that was bringing it to Canada. But I think it just takes time. Yes, definitely. A damaged Torah is, especially one that is beyond repair, might be buried. And this has to do, again, with religious politics. And in fact, one of the original issues way back in the 60s when Israel was trying to get the Holocaust Torahs was that they wanted to bury the vast majority of them. The Orthodox rabbinate, being in charge, still in charge, there said, there are problems with these scrolls. They shouldn't be used. The Westminster Synagogue was much more sort of liberally inclined and said, no, we want to keep them in use and in circulation. So there were a lot of politics, now that you mention it, a lot of religious differences, might be a more polite way to say it, about the scrolls and their use.
And I think there was a live question. Annette, I saw your hand up.
Yes, she just answered it. Thank you, Doctor. Yeah,
are they being damaged by use, considering their age? Sorry.
Annette, I'm sorry, I hit the mute all button just when you started speaking, when you looked like you weren't going to speak. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Okay. When you showed the picture of the Torahs all piled up against, I felt tears, and I thought, what is going to happen to those that are not whole? But you answered my question, so thank you.
The Memorial Scrolls Trust, the gentleman who runs it, he won't let any of them go uncared for, even if it means staying in the trust. So I have not yet met him in person, but I will soon. And he must be a pretty special fellow. So I hope that when he does decide to take a much deserved retirement, he has a suitable replacement.
Daniel, do we know anything? Paul and Miriam, I see both of you are unmuted if you have questions.
My question was, how do they decide who would get one of these scrolls? Was there any kind of selection criteria, or first come, first serve, or?
Yeah, no. I don't think that the Memorial Scrolls Trust has ever really sort of been in the business of sort of judging who should get one, but definitely just trying to make sure that they would be going to a place where they would be safe and well taken care of. Now, in the past number of years, there's a new requirement that if you have a scroll, you should really commit to creating a web page as a way of making sure that the information is basically kept alive, easy for other people to access. I can tell you a lot of the Canadian sites do not have web pages, but they're working on it. So I think that they want to make sure, bottom line, that any scroll is going to a Jewish community of some sort. There are scrolls kept at Jewish summer camps. There are scrolls, obviously, in some of the biggest, fanciest synagogues in towns, and so on.
And just to follow up to that, Paul, before you jump in, our own Sarah Skranka recently, as a result of the advertising for this, noticed that we, in fact, do not have a website for our Torah scroll, and that is changing. So we are in the
I'm just
process.
getting you in trouble left, right.
No, the opposite. We're really excited to be able to do that, and we should have thought of doing something like that independent of knowing that it's a requirement, but thanks to this program, it's going to happen.
Oh, that's great. I don't know for how long that's been a requirement, but I just think that, believe it or not, these objects, they actually do get lost. It's kind of shocking. There's one in Canada of the 26 lost. Nobody knows where it is. I was speaking to a Chabad rabbi because its last known location was at a Chabad house. And I said to the Chabad rabbi, we know, how can it happen? You lose a Torah scroll. And he said, oftentimes people will take them home to read from, to practice reading from, and somebody just somehow didn't make its way back. So of the 26 in Canada, we actually only know where 25 of them are. And, it's actually a big loss. 26 is not such a big number. But it's actually, that's data where this happens. This is life. The Skranka family came from Holocaust. Oh, you've got a connection. That's fantastic.
Do we know anything about the Jewish community of Holocaust prior to the Nazis? No, I
don't. Although, there are so many sites out there that you can search for information. There's a huge Jewish cemetery project in Europe, European Jewish cemeteries, and they've done a huge amount of work, especially in these areas. So you can oftentimes find maybe a picture of a Jewish cemetery in the area, a few key details at least. So I'm sorry I didn't have time to do that for you tonight, but okay. I really encourage you to do it. And in fact, there are really lovely stories of temples and synagogues creating a relationship with the original home of their scrolls and visiting. One rabbi here with whom I spoke, he ended up taking a group of congregants to the original hometown of their Torah scroll. And the vast majority of these small synagogues in the Czech Republic have been converted into churches. But they met with the pastor of the church, and she evidently, he couldn't say enough about what a moving, warm meeting it was. And, I think it becomes a very nice experience for people when they get involved in that. That's Tahor. They were in Canada for a while, but they've gone now. Can I answer anybody else's questions?
Any last questions?
Stephen, don't you have a question for me? You've heard it all before.
We love embarrassing stories about Stephen too.
The main thing, I'm not going to call you doctor. That's for sure.
Oh, thank you. You think of my grandfather, Dr. Rothenberg. I'm looking over my shoulder for my grandfather.
I know this. I had the same reaction. No, I am wondering, with some of the travel that we've talked about, are you able to, trace some in other areas? Is it, or, just as a byproduct of the research you're doing? You listed a dozen or more countries that they ended up in.
Oh, well, the Memorial Scrolls Trust, they have good records of where they've gone to recently. And then the key then is to go to as I've learned, even here in Canada, to then, try to track the people down in Canada who have the scrolls is actually more complicated than it might seem. Like scrolls are lost or people just don't answer their emails. But the other thing to note is what I said at the beginning, which is that there are many, many, many Holocaust Torahs that people smuggled out of Europe on their own. All kinds of them around. And so once you sort of start looking for things like that, it's amazing what you start to find and the stories people tell you. People who had sort of smaller scrolls in their homes in Europe, stuffing them down their shirts and under their coats and carrying them out. And so there are a lot of Torah scrolls that survived via, the refugee carriers who took them out. So it's just Memorial Scrolls Trust is particularly well known. And it was a kind of it's hard to know where to find the scrolls if you don't have something like a trust that has organized their dispersion. So for a research study, the trust is very useful, but there are lots and lots of scrolls out there that survived the Nazis and are hopefully in new homes now. Nothing else?
Dr. Rothenberg, truly, thank you so much. This was fascinating, and fascinating, I'm sure, for so many of the folks who are on. I'm seeing them nod. And we had a whole bunch of people who were streaming this as well. So we just appreciate you and you making this time so very much. A big thank you to Stephen for connecting us with you, and to all of the other Rothenbergs who joined the Zoom here to cavil a little bit. This was so really, really, I'm going to keep thinking about this for a while. And we'd love, if you're up for it, to check back in with you when you've done more research too, because I know you're really at the beginning rather than the end of this project. So.
That's right. Well, thank you again for having me, and I hope that you have a good and a meaningful Yom HaShoah, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you so much.